Hello and welcome to another Cambridge C1 video, and this time we're in for a real treat. We are looking at the use of English part 4, a very tricky part of the exam, a part where sometimes you look at a question like this and you think, I have got no idea what they want me to do. I know I need to write between 3 and 6 words and I need to use the word in bold and it needs to mean the same thing, but I don't even know where to start. Well, the point of this video will be to try and show you that very often there is a place to start. There's common structures that they're going to repeat again and again, the same grammatical points, the same kind of ideas of how they transform these sentences. And hopefully, after you've watched this video, you'll have a much better idea of how to at least put something down. Because even if you put down something which is half nonsense, you can still maybe get 1 mark, because only one part of it has to be right to get the 1 mark. And 1 out of 2 is 50%. You're nearly passing the exam. So you've had time to look at this one for your little starter. Shocking, something that shocked you with taken. The expression is to be taken aback. So taken aback, if you know that expression, is going to be 1 point. And then the other point is making the sentence structurally correct. The answer is they were taken aback when they heard the news. The news shocked them. They were taken aback when they heard the news. So that's your little sample to start with. What we're going to do in this video is the top 10 common structures that are repeated on every exam. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them will always be on the exam, so you're more prepared for part 4. Let's get into it. So we're going to start with the passive. The passive is going to be on many part 4s, and it's a very useful structure to know how to use anyway. We're not going to go into so much detail because you could spend a whole month just studying the passive, but a basic passive sentence: someone is repairing my car, What do you need to do? You need to keep the tense the same with the verb to be. So my car is being, and then they give us fixed. And then the other little trick, because it has to be 2 marks, doesn't it? There's always 2 things at least you're doing in each sentence. If it's now, then the expression with moment is at the moment. So my car is being fixed. That one's an easy one. You'll be lucky if you get one like that. Slightly more common for the passive in C1 part 4 is these people say, people think, these kind of questions. Everybody says, and then they give you said or thought, or this like general passive of, well, the structure you need is it is said. Is said to be, is said to have, is said to is thought to, is supposed to. The verb can change, the structure is basically the same. If people say that it will make you ill, then it is said to, and the to is important there, to, and then the rest is the same. You've had time to do it. To make you ill. Swimming after eating is said to make you ill. So the real point we're looking at here is you've got 2 examples here of how the passive is used. If there is a passive question on the exam, of course, it will not be exactly like this, but the basic structure will be the same. So you need to recognize, as soon as there's a question about people say, people think, people believe, everyone believes, many believe, so anything like that is a passive question. You know how it works. You know the structure. Just make sure you're using the right verb. You're keeping the first and the second sentence the same. So that's passive. Next. Reported speech. So this one where someone says something and then you are reporting what they said. At a later date, you are saying he said, he liked, Because it's C1, it's going to be a bit more difficult. So you'll find lots of questions and you'll find lots of different words for the same thing. For example, the trick here, do you like to watch? Well, we know it's reported speech, so we have to go back 1 tense. So like, this is present tense. We need to go to past simple. So we're going to be in the past simple. Then the subject, verb, object, we don't need to worry about too much because this is a yes-no question. So it becomes if, but do be careful because that subject, verb, object does come up quite a lot. The typical example I always remember in my head if I've got a doubt, where's the toilet? He asked where the toilet was. Toilet, subject, verb, was. Subject, verb, because it's not a question anymore. So where is the toilet? He asked where the toilet was. That is the reported speech of that. But to get back to this question, you've had lots of time to look at it. What do you need to be thinking? Well, you need to be using an expression that means like in the past simple with fond. Well, fond, you are fond of something. So he asked me, it's a yes no question. If I was fond, and then fond of something. So this is the other little trick. You are fond of, it's a preposition, we need ing, fond of watching. And there's all the marks. Asked if I was fond of watching. Maybe I made that one a little bit difficult, but I wanted to include lots of points. It could be a bit easier. It could be asked if I enjoyed watching. Then it'd be a bit easier. But it's a difficult exam. Fond, to be fond of something. I can imagine that on a C1 exam. So that's the basic idea for reported speech. Always keep in mind, I am saying what somebody said in the past. If you keep that situation in mind, that should help you a lot. And obviously you'll recognize a reported speech question because you normally have speech marks. Next up, another big topic, which again, we're not going to go into all the detail possible on because it's too much, but gerunds and infinitives. So I'm just sticking to some specific verbs where you'll be using a gerund or infinitive, but there's many situations where this could come up. But our question here, I ought to reduce the amount of alcohol I consume, said Bob. So what did Bob suggest? He suggested something. In English, when it's a thing, when it's like a thing, we use the gerund, don't we? So we need a gerund with down, that means reduce. The phrasal verb that means reduce, as in reduce the quantity of something, is to cut down. With suggest, this is going to be ing. Bob suggested, and we can see all the different verbs here, and we can see suggest is with the gerund. These are some of the most common ones you'll need for C1. If you're familiar with all of these, you should be okay. I refuse to listen to any advice. It seems to be, I enjoy playing cricket, and so on. Would you mind opening the window? You can see how these work. Well, suggest uses the gerund, it uses ing. So he suggested cutting down his alcohol consumption, or cutting down on, that's optional. But you can see 1 mark for getting the ing, and then 1 mark for knowing the phrasal verb cut down, and then again getting the sentence all correct. This marker, if I didn't explain, means, I'm sure you know this if you're watching this video about C1 part 4, but it means you get 1 mark if this is correct, 1 mark if this is correct on the other side. If you suggested to cut down his alcohol, you would get 1 mark because you got down his alcohol, but you didn't get cutting, you got to cut. So you can still get 1 mark even if you mess up one little bit. So anyway, that's gerunds and infinitive. As I said, this is how we use them with some verbs. There are other situations where you need to think about, do I need the gerund, do I need the infinitive? Following an adjective, you need the infinitive. Nice to meet you. We don't really say nice meeting you so much, nice to meet you. That is because adjective, infinitive. Following prepositions, gerund. When it's the subject or object of the sentence, gerund. That's why we say swimming is fun, because swimming is a verb, but we're using it like an object, like an activity, a thing, so it's the gerund. So these are things you can try and keep in your mind for when you've got this doubt of gerund or infinitive, which is really common on part 4. Next up, we have some third conditional questions. Third conditional, if you get a conditional question on the C1 exam, it will probably be third conditional because it's more complicated. What is a third conditional? Well, you're talking about something that didn't happen. I didn't save enough money. I couldn't go to the restaurant. It didn't happen. This is a completely imaginary hypothetical. But if I have gone to the restaurant, so you're saying, well, if I, and how do we use third conditional? We use the past perfect, and then we use would or could or might have with the perfect tense there as well. Something didn't happen in the past. And again, I always find it a nice idea to have like a reset sentence. I'm having a doubt about third conditional. I just think, okay, well, third conditional, I know this is, if I had studied more, I would have passed the exam. And I can tell myself, oh yeah, had studied, would have passed. That's the third conditional. So apply that to this question. And if I had saved enough money, I could have gone to the restaurant. Or I had saved more money. The idea is the same. Sometimes there'll be a couple of options, but as long as you've got the main idea the same, you'll get the 2 marks. So third conditional, very possible on the exam as well. Very formulaic. Quite an easy question for if you get one on part 4. Moving on, slightly similar one, the if only or the wishes. So again, we're talking about things that you want to happen, but maybe didn't happen. For example, I regret not contacting Mr. Smith when applying for university. I didn't contact this fictional teacher. And then the sentence is if, well, you probably know this because it's in the title, but imagine the title wasn't there. It's a little bit more difficult. You need to know if only is one of these expressions for regret, and you need to know it because it's not there. It's just a blank. If you get that, then you know if only I, then how do we use it? Well, when we're talking about something we want to change with if only or I wish, we do go back one tense. We back shift the tense. So if I'm talking about the present, past tense, past perfect. For example, if only I had more time, I'm talking about the present tense. I want more time now. I wish I had studied more means I didn't study in the past. So here we're talking about the past because I didn't contact Mr. Smith. If only I had got in touch in British English or gotten in touch in American English, then I'd be happy. The then is implied. We don't really need to say it, but the full sentence would be then it would have been better or something. And obviously the other point there is to contact is to get in touch. So with the past participle, gotten in touch. Okay, we're halfway through. Moving on. Number 6. Wow, this one is a big one. This one, some people just can't get their heads around it, but it's always on the exam. It's super, super common. So what is inversion? Well, we've got a common example here. As soon as Ali finished class, he went to play poker with his friends. No, he went to play poker with his friends. Well, inversion means following some sort of negative sentence starters like no sooner, seldom, rarely, not only, never before. You can see they're all a bit negative. We invert the subject and the verb as if the sentence was a question, but it's not a question, it's just a negative sounding sentence. So the example there, no sooner had X happened than Y happened. That's the expression. No sooner had than meaning it happened immediately after. There was no gap. That's why it's a bit negative. Or the same for seldom, as in seldom means rarely. You rarely see such a young manager. Seldom do we see such a young manager. We've made it like a question. Do we? Or if you want to put it even more complicated in a passive sentence, seldom is such a young manager seen. It's like a question, isn't it? Is such a young manager seen? Oof, not often. Only seldomly. Seldomly, I don't think is a word. It's already an adverb. Seldom. So it's like a question. That's basically how to do it. And you can see, rarely have I seen such a beautiful class. Not only should we stop polluting, we should also recycle and so on. Never before has humanity faced. They're not questions, they've just got the grammar of questions. Anyway, this one is very, very easy because I pretty much put the answer in the first sentence. You've just got to put the right details in. Who are we talking about? How do we use the structure? It's no sooner had Ali finished class than he went to play poker. And you can see you get 1 mark for the first part of the sentence, like the inversion phrase, and using it correctly. And then 1 mark for finishing the phrase, because it's no sooner than. The comma, I think, is optional. No sooner had Ali finished class than he went. It's fine without a comma. Right, we've got 4 left. These ones are a little bit more specific, so we'll double them up. The first one is comparatives. Comparatives, a fairly simple grammar point for C1, so they make them more complicated. You don't just have Bob is taller than Lucy. That's not going to be on the exam, is it? Not a C1 exam. We're going to be qualifying these comparatives with lots of little expressions and logical tricks and things. So this example, the meal was much less tasty than we expected. So the meal much less tasty, and we need to use nearly we expected. So nearly, if it's much less, then it's not nearly as, because it's a big difference. So it's not near, it's a big difference, it's not nearly. So all these kind of expressions, not nearly as good as, far better than, slightly better than. such, very common on the C1 exam in part 2 as well as part 4, all kind of comparing things. Well, plugging our as into this sentence, and I've almost given you the answer again already. Once you know the grammar, it's very easy. The meal was not nearly as tasty as we expected. And it's the same thing. This sentence is the same, isn't it? Much less tasty, not nearly as tasty. They both mean that there was a big gap in your expectations, a big comparison. So that's comparatives. And as you can see, we need to know how to do degrees of comparison. Then negatives. Another common one you get on the exam is negatives. But again, it's not just I play, I don't play, he didn't play. No. The common negative that I see a lot on the exam is where we use what I call the zero negative, where we're saying absolutely zero, no, again, the answer. If it wasn't necessary, then there was, well, how much need was there? Zero. And we say no reason, no hope, no water, no future. These mean there is zero reason, there are zero reasons, countable, uncountable. So here, if it wasn't necessary, then there was no need. That's the expression, isn't it? There's no need, no reason, no need, whatever expression it is. Then, of course, there's another little trick, to speak, but this is a speech. So you have to think, what verb goes with speech to mean speak? Well, we can say make or give a speech. That would be the most common one. Maybe deliver a speech. They're all fine. The main thing is no need, this zero negative, no need for Clara to give a speech, is the same as it wasn't necessary. There was no need. Okay, nearly there. Number 9. And my appearing PowerPoint has stopped. I pride myself on my PowerPoint. This is a huge disappointment, but I think we'll just continue anyway. So number 9 is a rise and fall. These are really common questions talking about statistics and things going up and down. Number of tourists renting flats has risen sharply. Well, then we can see we talk about sharp or steep or slight rises, falls, increases or decreases in something. So the point here is that you've got a big or small change in something. In must be the correct preposition. Then we just need to make sure that we're keeping the sentence the same because it has risen, so there has been a sharp rise in the number. This must be the same because we're keeping the sentence the same. If it's risen sharply, it's a sharp rise. Again, I put sharp here because it's a possibility, but in this question, it says sharply, you say sharp. If it says dramatically, dramatic. Abruptly, abrupt, whatever the adjective is. Again, they're testing can you manipulate words, can you do everything you need to do in English. And in the last one, this one's a little bit of a bitty one. It's not very common English, but it's on the exam. This one is where we use it at the start of a sentence to introduce an idea, to emphasize an idea. Example, I didn't work out how to assemble the sofa until I looked at the manual. So I didn't work out until I looked at the manual. It looked at the manual. That I worked out how to build it. That is doing a lot of work. This is why we need to read the whole sentence slowly, carefully, because that is telling us the answer. And how do we use this to introduce ideas? Well, it's like the dummy subject, it. Winning was our top priority. It was winning. That was our top priority. And we can see that again. It's the same sentence, but we're sort of introducing it with a useless it to sound more clever, to use more words. But, it's something that's done in English. So that means what we're doing here with only, it was only at this moment that I realized. So it was only when I looked or only once I looked that I worked out how to build it. And these are the same idea, using the word, using the grammar that they're going to ask you. So there we go. There's the top 10. I hope you've been taking notes of them because now I would like to give you some questions using this kind of grammar to see if you've understood it, to see if you can do it. So as always, pause the video, take notes, think about if you're doing it, what you need to improve, and then keep practicing. So here we go then. Here's question 1. You've got a little clue. We're going to need a verb, that's something Sandra's doing, and something with on. Well, the verb, that means this is the only way she's doing it. She won't accept any other way. She says it has to be this way. The verb is to, where's my verb plus preposition? Insist, isn't it? Insist on doing something, insisted on doing. Well, she insisted on going to the supermarket. Preposition, ing, that's why you've got a mark for the ing. That one's a bit of a difficult one because you have to pick insisted out of nowhere. But once you sort of think, okay, typical C1 verbs, reporting verbs, how do I use verbs? It's one of those verbs that is on the exam a lot. To insist on doing something, you get it a lot on the exam. This table, by the way, is great. Another teacher found this in my school a few years ago, and I've made so many copies of this. If you know how to use all these verbs, you're in a good position for C1 Part 4, for your writing, for your speaking, everything, because it really shows you how to use them. So make a note of that. Number 2, we've got a third conditional, haven't we? Because we can see wouldn't have, hadn't, this is third conditional. He wouldn't have been interviewed by the police if he hadn't seen the robbery. Let's just understand this, because this means he did see the robbery and he was interviewed. He wouldn't have been interviewed if he hadn't seen the robbery. But anyway, the same sentence. They wouldn't have interviewed him unless... So now we have to think about if and unless. And with witness, they wouldn't have interviewed him unless he... Well, then he was a witness. But we have to keep it the same sentence because it's going to be third conditional. So it's had been a witness. And then 1 mark for to, because that's a little bit difficult, but you are a witness to something, which is a bit weird, but that's how we say it. You're a witness to an event. Number 3, what is this testing? They should never place a human life at risk trying to rescue an animal with circumstances. Okay, when I see circumstances, this one is, you know straight away the expression. It's going to be an inversion because it's under no circumstances. It's a very common inversion expression on the exam, and it means never. So we know we're in the right place, never. So what should they do? Under no circumstances, then the inversion. This says they should, we invert it, should they. Under no circumstances should they. And there's your 2 marks. If you know how to do inversion, you know the phrases, you know how to turn 2 words around, you got your 2 marks. Well done. All right, there's 3 more because it's there's 6 questions. It's part of the exam, so let's do 3 more. We can see straight away what this one is. This is 3 marks because you just saw it 5 minutes ago. It's fallen dramatically. It has fallen dramatically. So again, there has been a dramatic fall in. I've made that too easy, really. I should have made that more difficult. But, if you've learned it, well done. It's another thing you know that is often on the exam. Number 5, people think. If people think that, then I'm looking at passive expressions because people think it is thought. The Chinese is among the most difficult languages. Chinese, the verb is think, so is thought to be one of the most difficult languages. People think it is to be. That's how we use it, isn't it? It's thought to be, just like we practiced. And finally, this one is a good one. This one has tripped up so many of my students. I remember doing this in a class of 20 students, and I think no one got it perfect in a C1 class, not a random primary school class. What time does the movie start? Asked Mark. Mark asked, so I'm reporting what he said. And it's not a question because I'm reporting what he said. I'm not asking a question. I'm just reporting what Mark said. Don't look at me. I'm just the messenger. Mark asked, subject, verb. He asked when the movie started. So we go back 1 tense because it's reported speech. Started, and it's asked. It's in the past tense. And movie, subject, started, verb. Subject, verb, reported speech is not a question, so we do not change them. So there you go, there's your 2 marks. It looks very simple now, but can you do it in the exam? Right, I think we'll do one more but a bit quicker. This one, I've included this because this is, as you can just about see here on my jeans background, this is just a random exam that I found. I don't even remember which book or website I've borrowed this from. But as you do them, just think, in almost every question, there is something we have just studied. And this is just a random one. I promise. I didn't, find this one to prove a point. So on the real exam, you will find the same. You will find the same ideas coming up again and again. And if you're comfortable with them, you're going to do much better. So take 10 minutes to try and do all of these. And then let's go through the answers. So a lack of work. How much choice did he have? 0 choice, no choice. This is what we were talking about, wasn't it? Had no choice. So if you know how to do the 0 negatives, you got 1 mark. The second one is a little bit more difficult. You have no choice but to do something, means except to do something. But we say but because that's the easy way of saying it, the more common way of saying it. 26, speech marks, reported speech. It is going to start. Well, if it's going to start in a minute, about to start, we know this expression, and it was about to start. It is going to start, it was about to start. This is reported speech. I'm going back 1 tense. So it's 2 out of 2 for things that we studied. 27. This one's a little bit more complicated. This is very complicated. Thanks to the success of the concert, well, the first thing you need to know is how to use led. Something leads to something else. The success led to what? It led to something happening, something, gerund. That is where this question is difficult. If it leads to something, we need the gerund. And it led to the singer being offered. That one is very, very difficult. As I said, gerund infinitive. This is something to study in more detail if you need to, but it's quite common on the exam. 28, 3 mark. In fact, isn't this just the same as the question I gave you, but with different objects? Instead of playing poker, it's going out on his bike. It's the same. No sooner had Alex finished his homework than he went out on his bike. It's a no sooner, it's an inversion question. Had Alex finished? Like a question. 29, this one isn't anything. This one's quite an easy question for C1, but it's if it is boring, it produces a feeling of boredom, then I get bored. And I get bored if I spend, I guess they're testing that, spend an evening watching television. But I think that one's quite an easy one. And the last one is similar to number 27, in that the difficult thing here is using the gerund correctly. Sarah's father thinks she should come earlier, home earlier, late. Well, if he thinks she should come home earlier, then he doesn't approve of staying out late. He doesn't approve of her staying out so late. So her staying out is like the gerund, the object. He doesn't approve of something. What is that thing? Her staying out so late. So there we go, out of 12. And you want 7 or 8 to be passing. 8, I think, isn't it? Because 7's not quite 60% off the top of my head. So 8's the aim. But as I said, difficult part of the exam. How can you practice it? It's difficult to practice, but I'm going to say the same thing I normally say, by doing it yourself, by really thinking about how this part of the exam is made, by transforming your own sentences, especially thinking about the grammar structures that we've been looking at today, because those are by far the most common. Here's an example that I just saw on BBC News. This is being recorded in the summer, as you can see from my nice white t-shirt, and it's hot. So authorities in North African countries are urging people to take measures to protect themselves as the heat takes hold. Well, this sticks out for me. This stands out for me. This could be something you'd find on part 4, because we've got to urge someone to do something. This is like a common reporting verb. He urged me to do it. He told me, he warned me, he urged me to do it. And then to take measures, this is a typical collocation. So these are two things in a short little passage where they're testing you on sort of C1 level expressions. So how do you turn it into a question? Well, first you need to write it in a different way. Try it if you want. How would you write this in a different way? Same idea, different words. This is how I did it. I said, they are insisting that people act. You insist, you urge. It's very, very similar. Act, take measures, do something. It's a very similar idea. I give you the word urging because you're not going to randomly know the word urging just from saying insisting. We need to give them that word. And we make sure the blank is long enough for 4, 5, 6 words. Authorities are measures to protect them. Well, it's the same sentence as before, so the answer should be easy. Urging people to take measures. 1 mark for urging people to, knowing how to use urge someone to do something. And then 1 mark for knowing take measures. That's the expression that goes, that means act. So you can make a question like this quite easily. It needs practice like anything. But when you're reading, as I keep saying, any high-level text, any authentic text, any book you're reading, any news you're reading, that is how they make the C1 questions, with some focus on these typical grammatical points. But basically, that's how they make the questions. It's a level where you need to speak at a level where you can understand these things. So typical English is how to practice it. All right, end. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. See you next time.